Welcome. I'm Olivia Mattis, and I'm delighted that you've chosen to spend an hour of your day with us today. We're presenting a beautiful film that I hope you've all seen by NAOR MENINGHER, who's with us today. The film is called Our Hebrews, and it presents the story of Little Jerusalem, this town, Pitigliano in Tuscany, that has an ancient Jewish presence and has this beautiful story of rescue during World War II, where the town rescued its Jewish population. And that's the kind of story we love to present in our series on rescue and resistance. So we have three speakers. In addition to the filmmaker, we have our resident expert, Dr. Mordechai Paldiel, who's on our board of directors, who's been on many of our programs, but he hasn't been on a program in a while. So we're bringing him back today, to the delight of all of you, I'm sure. And he was for almost 25 years at Yad Vashem as the director of the Department for the Righteous. And in addition, we have joining us from Israel, Deborah Siegel, born in America, but living in Israel. And she's an artist whose family is from Pitigliano, whose grandfather was the head of the Jewish community, and whose aunt wrote a famous cookbook about Jewish cooking in Italy. So what a delightful program it's going to be today, and also very educational. So let's start with Dr. Paldiel, who's going to give us an overview of the history of the Jewish presence in Italy. Mordechai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Olivia, and welcome to all you wonderful people on this story of this town of Pitigliano in central Italy. I don't know how many people are aware that Jews have lived in Italy for a longer period than in any other country in Europe, for over 2,000 years. Jewish presence in Italy begins in 150 BCE. In the Roman Empire, there were Jewish synagogues in Rome and in other places, Sicily, Calabria, and Apulia. And all of this is mentioned in all of the ancient stories. It's also mentioned in the New Testament, incidentally. But then Jews and Romans, they got along fine, but then things turned sour because the Romans controlled Judea, which is today Israel, and the Jews tried to liberate themselves. So there were several uprisings against Rome, which was suppressed by the Roman Empire and caused the destruction of the temple. And many Jews were taken to Rome as slaves, but then they stayed there. And so Jews continued to more or less thrive in the Roman Empire. But then in the year 324, the Roman Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity. And then several decades later, in the year 380, Christianity was made as the official religion of the Roman Empire. And in other words, that was the only religion that was allowed to practice, but they allowed the Jews to continue to be there. Jews continued in Italy. There were ups and downs. During the Middle Ages, Jews were expelled from certain cities, and then they were readmitted. What is important to note, and I have this on this screen, that Pope Innocent III was the first one who insisted that the Jews wear a distinctive sign, the yellow badge. We know that later on from the Holocaust, the yellow badge. But when Jews were expelled from Spain, many were admitted in Italy, in the Kingdom of Naples. But they were persecuted in Rome and Genoa, and this continued. In some places they were admitted, in some places they were expelled. In some places in the 16th century, even the Talmud was burned in public, and ghettos were created. And in the 16th century, we have on record many Jews who fled from a city called Livorno. They fled from other cities and they settled in Livorno and Pitigliano. So we have the first record of Jews actually living in Pitigliano in the 16th century, although Pitigliano existed for many centuries before that. During the French Revolution and when Napoleon took over Italy, Jews were fully emancipated and the ghettos were dismantled. But then when Napoleon fell, in 1815, again, the ghettos were again reinstated, and even the Inquisition. And then in 1870, when Italy became a United Nations, I don't know how many of you are aware, but probably many of you are, that until 1870, Italy was not one nation. It was divided into 8 different parts. But in 1870, Italy became one nation, Rome is its capital, and Jews were fully emancipated. In 1922, Mussolini came to power, the first fascist movement. Very strange for many to hear today that there were many Jews who joined the Mussolini's fascist party. It was permitted. And in fact, Mussolini himself, one of his mistresses, Margherita Sarfatti, was Jewish. But then this changed in 1938 when Mussolini aligned himself with Hitler's Germany. Then he passed the first series of anti-Semitic laws. Jews were downgraded to second-class citizens. They were dismissed from important positions in the economy and society. Pope Pius XI, who died in 1939, condemned anti-Semitism. It's very famous, the statement that he made before a group of pilgrims saying, spiritually, we are all Semites. So Jews were, in spite of Mussolini's alliance with Nazi Germany, Jews were not turned over to the Germans. The Italians refused to turn over the Jews to the Germans for concentration camps. And therefore, Jews who lived either in Italy or the Italian zones of administration in various parts of Europe, like Greece and France, were saved. And personally, my family and myself, we lived in the Italian zone in France for 9 months, and nobody bothered us. But then when Italy capitulated to the Allies in September 1943, the Germans took over Italy, or that part of Italy that had not yet been liberated by the Allies. And there they reinstalled Mussolini, but he was a stooge now. Italy was not an independent country. And they began to round up Jews. They began in Rome and it spread to Venice and other places. And Jews had to go into hiding. The Germans managed to capture 7,800 Jews and sent them most of them to Auschwitz, where they were gashed. Most of them, you know the story of Primo Levi, who was there, and he luckily, fortunately survived. But most of the 35,000 Jews still in Italy, a lot of them had already left before that, they went into hiding. And most of the Italian population did not agree with the anti-Semitic measures of their government and the Germans. And many of them hid Jews in their homes, including many of the clerics and the clergy. And so 90% of the Italian Jews survived the one and a half year period of the German occupation, which began in September 43 and lasted until May 1945. Next slide. So when we come to the story of Pitigliano, how Pitigliano saved the 60 Jews that lived in that little town. The story is, of course, is of the period when the Germans held sway over that region. So on the map, you can see what happened on September 8, 1943. As you can see, the southern part of Italy was liberated by the Allies, including the city of Naples. But that part of Italy, from Rome upwards, including Venice and including Milano and the other cities, right, were held by the Germans. And Pitigliano was right there, as you can see on the map. And this lasted for a year and a half. And Jews had to go into hiding. And for the story of Pitigliano under the German occupation, I am sure you have seen that on the film. But the film also shows a little bit of how Jews lived in Pitigliano before the Germans came in, the Jewish synagogue, the Jewish mikveh, and so forth. To make it, to summarize, the Italian population saw the Jews as part and parcel of the Italian nation. Jews in Italy were not considered as outsiders, like in other countries in Europe, where Jews were tolerated, but they were tolerated as outsiders. But here, Jews were accepted as full-fledged members of the Italian people, but they accepted the fact that Jews practice another religion. And this didn't bother to the Italians, who were almost 100% Catholics. from the beginning. So it's a beautiful story about Italy, and it's a beautiful story about Pitigliano. And for more on this, I want to turn over the floor to the producer of the film, Our Hebrews, with an S at the end. And this is Mr. NAOR MENINGHER. So NAOR, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mordecai. Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Hopefully you saw the film, and thank you so much for watching it. The film is already, I think, 5 years old or something like that. And it fills me with joy that it still rocks on and it has a life of its own and people still watch it and are interested in it. And just a few words about me. I live in Israel. I'm a film graduate. I studied film in Tel Aviv University. This film, I made it while studying in the university. It was this side project and a passion project because I'm obsessed with Italy. And right off the bat, I'm going to plug my YouTube channel, Italy Guy, which is my current project. So my affair with Italy is constant, and I studied Italian, and I came to Pitigliano when I was like 12 or 13 years old. And I fell in love. And since then, I've been going constantly, except for COVID year. But right when they opened the borders, right after COVID in June, I was like on the first plane that landed in Rome. And yeah, so I'm a huge Italy enthusiast. I don't have Italian roots. I'm half Romanian, half Polish. And yeah, so today what I'm going to do with my short time here is to tell you 3 quick stories that didn't make it to the movie. I have this short presentation, and I'll try to tell you 3 very quick stories. So the first story that didn't make it to the movie is the story of the electricity of Pitigliano. And here in the photo, you see a ceremony that was held less than 2 years ago, where they commemorate the city of Pitigliano. Here you see the mayor, you see Elena SERVI, who currently is the protectorate of the synagogue, and she's the only Jew left in Pitigliano. And what they are doing here, they are commemorating, they are inaugurating this plaque that tells the story of a very special guy named TEMISTOCLE SADUN, who was Jewish, and he brought electricity to Pitigliano in the year of 1898, making it, I think, one of the first villages in Tuscany, if not the first, to get electricity, which was a huge historic event back in the day. And in the movie, there is a scene that was cut out where one of the protagonists, Pierino, and you can see it in the next slide, is demonstrating. He has on the wall the actual sign from back in the day, congratulating Pitigliano. So this is a replica of the sign that was probably hanged on the walls. And he shows me that he has it on his wall. And in this sign, I'll try to translate you. It basically is excitement for the electricity, the miracle of electricity that was brought to Pitigliano thanks to this Pitigliano Jew, Mr. SADUN, who was an engineer, and he came up with the ingenious idea, let's do it. And he pushed for this, and it was like his personal passion project, which is very, very touching. It just goes to show how deep the connection and how important was the Jewish people of Pitigliano to Pitigliano's history. So I'll just translate just a little piece of the text here. So it says, electricity, this mysterious power of nature that with huge effects that comes from science, and thank you to the huge contribution of Mr. SADUN, who was the first to come up with this stupenda, it means like amazing opera, amazing operation of bringing this technology to Pitigliano, and now we have electricity and we have light, and it's like a miracle. So very emotional story about the history of Pitigliano. And my hero, Pierino, on the movie hangs it on his wall. So it just goes to show how they still remember. And in this plaque that I showed you in the ceremony, that was just held. So this is a huge part of Pitigliano's history. So this is one quick story that was left out on the cutting room floor. The next anecdote is the amazing story of the ARON HAKODESH, the holy Torah book of the Pitigliano synagogue, that this beautiful piece of art that was part of the synagogue for centuries. The Pitigliano synagogue is hundreds of years old. And when the State of Israel was established, I do not know how, but somehow they managed to take this amazing piece of art, ARON HaTorah, ARON HaKodesh, and they brought it to this northern periphery city of Carmiel, to this really unimportant, unfamous synagogue in Carmiel. And those are photos from 20 years ago or something, and it just shows you, first of all, how beautiful this thing was, and how it was, I don't want to say vandalized, but you see they drew holes in this ancient wood, and they really ruined, they didn't respect the history of this piece of art. So there were efforts by some people to bring it back to where it belongs, to the Pitigliano synagogue, and unfortunately this didn't happen yet. But hopefully, I'm calling from here. If someone can help make this happen, if someone has an idea how to do it, I think it's very important, and yeah, hopefully it will change in the future. So that's the story of the ARON HaKodesh from Pitigliano's synagogue. Just look how beautiful it is, right? It's just, they don't make them anymore like they used to in the old days. So that's this little story. And last but not least, those delicious candies that are called sfratti. And those are traditional baked goods that were conceived by the Jews of Pitigliano hundreds of years ago. Those are practically candies made of dough, and inside you have nuts, honey, dates, this mixture, and it's really delicious. And the story goes that back in the day, they would beat the Jews, right? You had police and persecutors, and they would beat the Jews with a stick. And so the Jews, like in the Hebrew saying, me'az yatsa matok, from something painful, you make something sweet. They made a candy in the shape of a stick. And the beautiful thing is that even today, even this morning in the Pitigliano bakery, you have two bakeries in the ancient city of Pitigliano. You can buy those. You buy them, and they are represented, and it's like the pride of the city. They're very proud of their traditional sweet, because not every town in Tuscany has a traditional sweet, and they adopted it as their own. And you can find it in almost any restaurant as a dessert. So it's to me it's pretty emotional. And another nice story is that in the ghetto bakery, which is run by Christians now, by Francesca, and not only do they sell those, they also sell their version of matzah. Not only in Pesach, throughout the year you can go there and buy matzahs, and that's just to remember the ancient community that was there. So those are three quick stories about Pitigliano. And the amazing thing is, each time I'm there, I discover something I didn't know. There are so many secrets to reveal. And from here, I give you Miss Deborah Siegel to talk about her amazing family history in Pitigliano.
Hi. So today I'm here as the granddaughter of AZEGLIO Baruch SERVI, who was the last head of the Jewish community in Pitigliano, which survived approximately to 1951, when it was closed. The temple was closed, and my family, at least, moved away from Pitigliano. And as NAOR mentioned, today there's only Elena SERVI. They're the same last name, but they're actually not related. She's the only Jew left in Pitigliano, and she safeguards the temple. SERVI, I just start with the name SERVI because it connects to what Mordechai said. SERVI means slave. So my mother was adamant that her family was in Italy since the Romans took over Jerusalem, and they came with the destruction of the Second Temple as slaves to Rome, hence their name SERVI. And as Mordechai mentioned, they ended up in the 1500s in Pitigliano, which at that point was a free area. And eventually they were put into a ghetto, but they lived more or less in peace with their neighbors until the war. So Azeglio SERVI didn't plan on being the head of the community, but he was quite a debonair journalist as a young man. But he had studied in yeshiva. There was a school in Pitigliano where you could study Jewish texts, and there was a library filled with Jewish texts. I'll show you one that was written by hand by my great-grandfather later on. It must have been quite a wealthy community at one point. From if you know, from the remnants, the relics that have survived since then. So this is my grandfather. I'll take the next slide. The next slide is of the ghetto of Pitigliano, which you see here. So this is part of the ghetto. I know for a fact that my cousin's family lived up those stairs to the right. Another cousin lived at the stairs at the end. I'm not sure when this photograph was taken. And the temple, I believe, is around the corner where my mother's family lived, down a staircase right next to the temple. And so my grandfather's family, they were originally 9 siblings. They all remained in Pitigliano till most of them I think all of them until the war, and then some of them left. And they all lived in this ghetto, and they lived in each other's homes. It was kind of like a commune, chamula, right? They lived together, and we'll see in the next slide, in a few slides, you'll see all the cousins one after the other. But here, first you see my grandfather in the synagogue, and most of these relics don't exist, but some of them have showed up in different places. The parochet is in the parochet is what covers the ARON HAKODESH, which is now in Carmiel. The parochet itself is in the Jewish Museum in New York. When my mother came to Jerusalem, she discovered the menorah that you see there, I think, in the temple, the Jewish the Italian temple synagogue in Jerusalem, and there's a Chanukia or Chanukah in the Israel Museum. These objects disappeared during the war, and perhaps the family felt they were buried by the maid that was safeguarding them, and somehow they showed up again in other parts of the world. And there's a few things that the family has. We have the relics first. Okay, so there are 2 handwritten hand calligraphy books, because my grandfather was not only the head of the community, and his father and his grandfather, and supposedly for many generations, the family led the community in Jerusalem. So they wrote the prayer books by hand. Here you have the songs and the prayers of Pitigliano. It's all handwritten. That's Shlomo SERVI written there. And that's my great-grandfather. I believe this, if you make it smaller, there's a date there. I think it was right before World War I, they finished this book, 1913. And the cover is on the left. In the middle is a yad that's used for pointing when you read the Torah. And this yad, there's a lovely story that I used to love when my mother told me of, it's a sad story, but also a lovely story, that the temple was vandalized and all the gold objects, ritual objects that were in the synagogue were stolen. My mother was born in 1930, so she remembered this story, so we're talking about the mid-1930s. And my grandfather sat down, stayed up all night after the vandalism and drew every single stolen object by memory. And then he had them, they were all made in gold, which also shows that the community must have had considerable wealth at one point. And he had them remade, collected money and had at least some of them remade in silver. And this one object remains in my family, along with the books. So this was remade from memory by my grandfather, who was quite an artist himself. So the next slide. This beautiful calligraphy, I think. Okay, so this is just family photos. They're actually, on the left, you see my grandparents, that's AZEGLIO. As you can see, quite debonair, and his wife, who was from Rome, she wasn't from Pitigliano, although most of my grandfather's siblings married people from Pitigliano, and there was a lot of in-marriage of cousins and second cousins. That's my aunt Edda, who you'll see in the end wrote stories of Pitigliano in a cookbook, and my mother's two older uncles. And on the right, you see my mother, who was born a twin. Her twin later died. But these are photographs by Adolfo Denci, and you'll see that a lot of the family photographs are quite beautiful because this amazing photographer went around the area and to make money photographed families, not just the Jews, everyone. I found his archive recently online, and amongst the archives you have some of the beautiful pictures of also the Jewish community. So this is two family photos. There's my mother there on the right, it says Marcella. The next slide. And so here you see, this is about a year before my mother was born, so this must be 1929. And these are all cousins, siblings or cousins, and must have been a summer month. This is how they were dressed. They were not wealthy. Although you see the square behind them, I remember walking around Pitigliano for the first time as a young child, and my mother saying, well, my uncle designed that, and my father's cousin designed that. As we saw, but with electricity, they were engineers, or they were quite educated, the Jews of Pitigliano. Several engineers, several architects, accountants, and Jewish scholars as well. Dantilates, who's a known name, also came from Pitigliano as a Jewish scholar. My great-grandfather was married to his aunt. So there were also there were a lot of Jewish scholars, because there was a yeshiva in Pitigliano, which must have ended by 1930, had closed down for sure. Okay, so there you see, Edda's on the left, the one who wrote the cookbook, and in the end is my older uncle. So here you see a family gathering. I believe it's the bar mitzvah of the boy all the way on the right, that's Aldo, a cousin of my mother, and next to him is my grandfather, who must have officiated at the bar mitzvah, and circled there is my mother. So this, I would say this must be mid-1930s, must be about 4 or 5 there. She was born in 1930. The next photo, you see this, I believe, in NAOR's film. It's hanging in the temple in Pitigliano. Okay, this is just how you see how they dressed up in Pitigliano. On the right, again, my mother circled next to her brother, and on the right end is her sister Edda. And the left are her cousins, who were from a wealthier branch of the Pitigliano family. My mother's family, as he was the head of a quite dwindling, my grandfather was the head of a quite dwindling Jewish community. So surviving financially wasn't easy, but he was literate and most of the community was not literate. So he made a living also by keeping books for the peasants. And they paid him with food from the fields, from their gardens. He also played a lot of cards. He liked that. Sometimes made money, sometimes lost money. My mother used to say he would come home in the middle of the night with cases of chocolate that he had won in his card game. So that was another side of my grandfather who led this dwindling community. And here you see my aunt, Edda, 1938. I believe right before the racist laws were enacted. She was named Edda, which is interesting because that was, she also had a Jewish name. They all had Jewish middle names. Hers was Deborah, like me. And she was named Edda because that was Mussolini's daughter's name. So that just shows you something of the relationship between the Jews and the community. Some of them were fascists during World War I, the Jews. And they lived in harmony with the community. My mother told me stories about how on Yom Kippur, her mother would ship them off to Christian families to take care of them so that she would be free to go to the synagogue until the racist laws in 1938, after these pictures were taken. And then from one day to the next, she was kicked out of school, and her non-Jewish friends crossed the street when she came. And for her, at age 8 at this point, was quite traumatic, and that trauma never left her of no longer being accepted by the community after having grown up as being part of the community. And it continued to get continue that way in public. Although, as Mordechai mentioned, the peasants helped save my mother and her siblings during the war. The ones not in Pitigliano, but the surrounding towns where they were in hiding during the war. My grandparents were actually, and my mother's younger brother, who's still alive actually in Parma. He's the last surviving member of my family that grew up in Pitigliano. I believe he's now, must be about 90, 91 now. Still very lucid. And he was interred in prison in I think the end of 1943 when the Nazis took over Pitigliano. But the whole family survived the war. And can I have the next slide? The left is the last picture. According to my uncle, I asked him a few days ago, he says, this must be right before they went into hiding. That's my mother in the middle next to my AZEGLIO, the head of the community, with his oldest son behind him. And my mother's holding the arm of my Aunt Edda, who actually wrote a lot of stories. You see on the right is her cookbook, which is more than a cookbook. It tells a lot of the stories of Pitigliano. That's a drawing of the hills, supposedly Pitigliano, that echoes the background of the picture on the left. She wrote a few books, a few cookbooks, and one book that document some of the stories. She was born in 1926, so she remembered quite well the Pitigliano before the war. And I just want to end with one last slide of my mother, all of 14, who served as a partisan during the war. This is a document that says she was a partisan from the 10th of March 1944 to the 20th of July 1944. She and her siblings that were in hiding at one point joined the partisans. And I thought I would end with that. I can go on with lots of stories, but that's what the time has. Okay.
Okay, so thanks to my three wonderful speakers. So we'll get to your questions in just a little bit. Please continue putting your questions into the chat box. Right now, I want to briefly tell you about our two last programs of this year, 2021, and then give you a little sneak peek of 2022. So today's program is part one of our look at Italy. Next week will be part two. Next week's program is called Fleeing Mussolini, Italian Jewish Refugees to the United States. And so today's program is on the Jews who stayed in Italy, and next week is on the Jews who left. So anyway, to continue our look at Italy. So that's quite interesting. Next week is a free program. And also next week, we're doing it in partnership with the Primo Levi Center in New York. I always love to partner with other organizations. And so next week is one such program. And then in 2 weeks' time, we have our last program of the year. It's a very, very special program where we are honoring a hero, a modern day hero. Her name is Judy Feld-Carr. She is a Canadian woman, lives in Toronto, and she spent 28 years of her life rescuing the Jews of Syria from 1973 until 2001. This is what she did in secret. She created this amazing underground network. She led it, and it's just an amazing thing that she did. Her story was not known until her action was finished. After that, she was honored by Israel. She was honored by Canada, and we are honoring her on December 5th. The program will have music. It will have a very inspiring film. We're going to have her in person. She's going to be interviewed by Dr. Shulamit Reinhardt. We have a master of ceremonies who's a Broadway star, Broadway actress, Samantha Massell, whom you met a year ago, if you were with us a year ago, when we did a program on Fiddler on the Roof. She was in the Broadway production of Fiddler as Huddle, and she was on our program, and she will be the master of ceremonies. So that will be a whole lot of fun. We have free tickets to anyone who needs it. We have a sponsor, Patty Asquith-Kenner, who's offering free tickets to anyone who needs one. But for those who can afford to pay, the ticket price is $36 at the entry level for just that program only. And then there are higher giving levels. It is our fundraiser for the year. And if you're interested in being with us next year as a season ticket holder, you will have that opportunity as well to buy a ticket for December 5th at the season ticket level. Then all of our programs in 2022 will be yours, and we will do all the work. You won't have to worry about deadlines or registration or any of that. And just to give you a little sneak peek of 2022 to entice you, we're going to have Susanna Heschel speaking about her famous and important father, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a civil rights hero and leader. We're going to have a whole program on Sophie Scholl and the White Rose anti-Nazi resistance movement. We have a program planned about an art spy whose name was Rose Valland, who rescued the masterpieces from Jewish collections in Paris by keeping meticulous clandestine notes of what the Germans were doing. She was a French museum employee who was there when the French museum system was taken over by the Nazis under Nazi occupation, and she pretended not to speak any German. She understood it fluently. She would memorize what happened during the day and write it all down at home later that day. And she was instrumental in the restitution of works of art after World War II. So she's an amazing figure, Rose Valland, and there's a whole movie about her, a new movie called The Art Spy. So that and many more programs are coming your way in 2022. So I do hope you will consider becoming a season ticket holder for next year. And that is my pitch. And now we go to your questions. So question number one, there's kind of a back and forth discussion about how is it possible that a Jew in Italy would join the fascist party. So how is that possible? What is that all about?
I will try to answer that. Fascism was born in Italy under Mussolini in 1922, and there were two wings in the fascist party. One was very anti-Semitic, and the other one was not anti-Semitic. What Mussolini and the fascists wanted, they had the illusion of recreating part of the old Roman Empire around the Mediterranean Sea. So they wanted Rome, they wanted Italy to become a colonial. They were jealous of England and France that had so many colonies, the French Empire, the British Empire. And they felt that Italy, because of the Roman Empire heritage, and because Italy being such a great a nation with so much culture, if you go to Italy, you go to all the cities, you actually go from one museum to the other. And they felt that Italy should also have colonies and should also have an empire. So they went ahead and they invaded Ethiopia, and then before that they took over Libya, and then Albania and so forth. So it was not directed against the Jews. In fact, in the early years of Mussolini's rule, he was a pro-Zionist. He invaded Chaim Weizmann from the Zionist organization to Rome. And he said that Italy will support the Zionist endeavor, but for that reason, for that to happen, the Zionists would have to disengage their alliance with Britain and join an alliance with Italy, and Weizmann was not prepared to go that far. So Jews were even encouraged to join the fascist party, and there were, I don't know how many, but there were thousands of Jews, members of the fascist party. So this honeymoon didn't last, but it lasted quite long. It lasted from 1922 to 1938. That's 16 years. What happened in 1938, Mussolini decided to align himself with Hitler. And when you align yourself with Hitler, you got to have some anti-Semitic laws in your country. It doesn't work any other way. And so in 1938, I just have to mention, before 1938, Mussolini scoffed at the racial laws of the Nazis, and he stated that the Italians were more superior than the Aryans because they had such a rich culture, such a rich cultural background. And when the Italians were producing that all their historic culture way back to the Roman Empire, the Germanic tribes were still moving from one tree to the other. And so he scoffed at them. But later on, he realized he needed Hitler's support to create that visionary empire, Italian empire. So the first anti-Semitic laws, racial, were passed in 1938. It was a great shock to Italian Jews. It was a great shock. Some Italian Jews couldn't take it and committed suicide. I mean, Jews were kicked out from leading high positions. Jewish children could no longer go to public school. It was a shock to Italian Jews, but it didn't go any further than that. No concentration camps of the form that existed in Germany and in other places in Europe existed in Italy. There were internment camps, and some Jews were taken there and they had to perform labor, but they also had schools, they had synagogues, and they had things in the Italian concentration camps or internment camp, which was such a far cry for what we know about what happened in the German concentration. And of course, no killings took place. But this all changed again when Italy left the Axis camp, when Italy betrayed Hitler and surrendered to the Allies. That was on September 8, 1943. And the Germans then immediately took over that Italian part, which had not yet been liberated by the Allies. And then they imposed their type of persecution of the Jews on the Jews that were in their zone of occupation. And most Jews were still in the German zone of occupation, which included rounding up the Jews and sending them to concentration camps, including the one in Auschwitz. So this all changed on September 8, 1943. There were still the old-time fascists were divided between those who felt that this was a mistake And there were the other radical anti-Semites who felt, well, maybe the time has come to help the Germans round up the Jews. But by and large, the Italian population, by and large, did not agree with that type of policy. I'm talking about the man on the street. So as much as they could help to save the Jews by sheltering them, they did. Of course, there were always people who, in return for rewards and so on, denounced Jews and turned them over. But by and large, the fact that most Jews, 90% of the Jews, survived in Italy under the harsh German occupation, that the Germans truly treated the Italians very harshly, it can be attributed to the notion of Italian people. So I want to end by saying, you know, there is a general feeling to say that in Catholic countries, Jews fared worse than in Protestant countries. That is not true. Italy is the oldest Catholic country in Europe, and most Italians are Catholics, and there are monasteries and convents and holy sites and everything. And the Vatican is in the heart of Italy, but the Italians who were Catholics did not interpret that as meaning that one had to persecute the Jews to the degree as the Germans. So, and I personally am here today because I lived for 9 important months in the Italian zone of France, where in the other parts of France, Jews were being picked up by the Germans and the French police. And the Italian zones, they didn't bother us at all. We were free for the 9 months when the Italians were in charge. This is all I have to say. Historians are still divided about Italian fascism, okay? But the fact is that Italian fascism during the early period did not go as far as German Nazism, as far as the Jews were concerned.
Okay, so let's get to some other questions. So one has to do with, why did people leave after the war? Why is there hardly any community left? Deborah, maybe?
I'm trying to think what I know about that. I know that I actually just recently spoke to my uncle about this because I asked him when exactly did the community close. So I know that after the war, my grandfather tried to keep the temple open, and he managed to do so, at least for high holidays, on special occasions. But the community had dwindled, there wasn't money. His older children had already moved to Florence, and he couldn't survive financially. And there was really very little reason to keep the community going because there was very little community left in the town. And most of them were already assimilated as well. So when he left, the community totally closed, and the synagogue itself was not, the temple itself was not, it had been bombed from the back during the war according to my mother at least, by American airplanes that released their unused bombs on the side of the mountain. So it was no longer, this construction itself was no longer safe. That's how I remember when I saw it for the first time when I was quite young, I think like 1963. I remember my mother climbing over the wall and being frightened because it looked like a danger zone. Eventually it was restored with the Elena SERVI, who we saw in NAOR presentation now. She was behind restoring the synagogue, but it wasn't really viable and safe to use the synagogue after a while, and they had to survive, so they went to live with their sons in Florence. My mother and her sister went in 1950, and they joined them with their younger son in 1951, and then the community closed until Elena managed to reopen it as a tourist site. It's no longer an active community, it's a tourist site. And the community was quite interested in getting tourism, so they collaborated in restoring the synagogue. That's why they left, because there was no community.
I wanted to mention, Naor, you're so kind in allowing us to show the film for another week. So those of you who have not seen the film yet, you'll have one more week to see it, and feel free to forward the link to other people and make sure that they see the film. So again, you have 1 week from today to see the film or see it again, and it's definitely worth it. There are several questions about the righteous Gentiles of Pitigliano, and I know it was in 2 phases. There was a phase that happened, Dr. Paldiel, when you were at Yad Vashem, and then another phase, NAOR, that you document in your film. So maybe the 2 of you can explain a little bit about the honoring of the rescuers of Pitigliano.
Fine, I'm always happy to talk about the righteous, about the good people. And there were many of them in Italy. Now, at Yad Vashem, in the work about the righteous, which I presided over for 24 years, I was head of that department at Yad Vashem, we did get a lot of testimonies by people who survived in Poland, in Holland, and in other places. Because the work at Yad Vashem under this topic was based on testimonies by people. Because nobody who hid a Jew in his home went into the local office of the city and filled out a form stating, yes, I'm hiding some Jews in my, so official archives are lacking. So we have to get it, as we say, from the horse's mouth, from the people themselves. So people who survived in Poland and in Holland and in other countries, they felt that their survival was so miraculous that they had to tell their story to Yad Vashem. So we had no problem getting stories out of survivors from many countries in Europe, Poland, Hungary, Romania, whatever, and Germany. When it came to Italy, we had a problem because in Italy, Jews who survived, they felt that they got so much help from the local population that although it was dangerous, but they didn't have that sense, that urge to come out and tell their stories because, for instance, when we got stories from places like Poland, then in their stories, it's always like, oh, there was a lot of anti-Semitism and a lot of local people were looking for Jews, but I was saved by this very good Pole. You don't have such stories in Italy where a person says there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Italy and people were looking for Jews left and right, but I was saved by this good Italian. That's not the situation in Ity, okay? So we had a difficult problem in getting stories out of Italy. So right now, I don't know, I'm no longer at Yad Vashem. I don't know how many people we have honored, but they number in the hundreds, When I left Yad Vashem, we had maybe 300 or 400. Maybe now it's 500, 600, 700.
You're talking about Italy, right? Of course.
I'm talking about Italy.
Yeah.
But if
regarding Pitigliano,
but if 35,000 Jews, and even in Pitigliano, if 35,000 Jews survived in Italy, there must be more than simply several hundred Italians who helped them to survive. There must be several thousand at least. I'm glad you mentioned Pitigliano. There were 60 Jews in Pitigliano, and as I understand, they all survived. They were hidden, not necessarily inside Pitigliano, maybe some inside Pitigliano, and some of them in the outlying villages. There was an underground in Italy, the partisans, as they call themselves, and they also helped Jews. So what's the big deal? Well, there were partisans in other parts of Europe who fought the Germans and also turned on the Jews, like in Lithuania, Ukraine, and Belarus, and Poland. So it was not only, it's not always safe for Jews to be with partisans, but in Italy, Jews who came to the partisans, they were 100% safe. They didn't have to fear that the partisans are going to take Jews and shoot them because they were Jews. So that accounts for the fact that most Jews survived. And that also accounts for the fact that we don't have all the stories that we should have of people who were helped by Italians. And we don't have in Italy what we have in other countries. We don't have a local organization that encourages people to come out and tell their stories of survival. We don't have that. So, and that accounts for the small number of Jews that are listed officially as righteous among the nations on the roster of rescuers at Yad Vashem.
Naor, do you want to add to that?
Yes, just they asked specifically about Pitigliano. So I have the invitation here from the original ceremony, and the families that were honored with this originally with the justice among the nations are I see the Luciano family, Stefano, Nucciarelli, Simonelli, Bisogni, and Sono, of course, Fortunato Sono. Those are the families who got the actual recognition. And then in 2015, I don't know exactly how many, but I think quite a few other Pitiglianese families who didn't have enough testimonies or proof to get the actual sign got a certificate, and many of them have this certificate from Yad Vashem, which is one degree under the actual recognition, but it's still very honorable. And as my friend Ori, who helped me in the production, said, in Pitigliano, the locals, they pull out those Yad Vashem certificates as if they were Pokemon cards, in the sense that it's just so common there, and it's just incredible, right? That so many people have those. So they're very proud of that.
I just want to add something, if I may. When the word got out in 1942, 43, that the Italians were not mishandling and not damaging the Jews, a lot of Jews fled to the Italian zone of occupation. In France, my father and mother, we were in Marseille, and we were afraid that we were going to be picked up by the French police and turned over to the Germans. And when we heard that nearby in Grenoble, the Italian zone, Jews were not touched, we fled to the Italian zone. And there were thousands of other Jews. The same thing in Greece. A lot of Jews fled from Thessaloniki to Athens, which for the greater part was held by the Italians, at least till September 1943. So the very fact that Jews fled to be under the Italian occupation, under the Italian fascist occupation, rather than to be either under the Nazi occupation or even under the French collaborationist occupation, that tells a lot. That tells a lot. That tells something about how the Italians viewed the Jews. So most Italians may have been a little bit of fascist. Maybe they wanted to recreate the old Roman Empire, but they didn't see what this has to do with hurting the Jews. So that's the beautiful thing about the Italian population.
Great. Well, yet again, an hour has flown by. So thanks to our fabulous speakers and to our audience. I apologize we didn't get to all of your questions, but I think the discussion was really quite fascinating. And so thank you to all, and I hope to see you for part 2 of our program on Italy next week, and then our program honoring Judy Feldkar, the rescuer, in 2 weeks.